in the world of television, we're not really currently in a world where finales are a big deal anymore. And this will sound kind of strange, and I feel like it's a big argument that I'm making with very little justification, just vibes. But there's so much TV these days, and most of it is released on streaming, that TV events kind of aren't the same thing as they used to be, which I don't think is a good or a bad thing. I think it's a net neutral. But that means when there is a really big television finale that everyone is paying attention to, it's kind of a shut up and listen moment. And especially for me, because this was a fandom that I was particularly engaged with. You know, I watched the first Stranger Things like when it came out in 2016, and I've watched every season upon release religiously since. I always said it was a really great show because of how mainstream it was, and that might sound like a criticism. I don't think mainstream is a bad thing. I think that it has a really broad appeal, not just because it's so familiar and, dare I say it, derivative, but because it has such a broad base of characters. You know, they're all different ages, so that the show works for such a large demographic of people. But anyway, I digress. Stranger Things 5 was released, and people feel all kinds of fucking weird about it. Like, okay, so I said I watched the show on release. That's actually not true. I waited a few days to watch it with my father, who is also a big fan. But we were apart for New Year's, so we did not watch the finale straight away. But that meant that I had time to like witness a strange meltdown on the internet where critics and fans alike expressed dismay over the finale and the previous 3 episodes. I should add volume 2. And I couldn't really work out why. Tons of people at the time were comparing it to the Game of Thrones finale, which I understand it was the last like really big fantasy come sci-fi finale event, and it's, you know, the biggest fantasy show that ever existed and may ever exist. But it felt like people have forgotten just how fucking bad Game of Thrones was. Like, I watched the finale, and it wasn't like the finale threw me for a loop and made me go, oh my god, this is terrible. Because the previous 2 seasons of television had been terrible, and I was still watching it for some reason. The last good episode of Game of Thrones is the episode called The Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And the things that I like in it aren't even the episode itself, it's small moments. It's like, I like Podrick singing, I like that Jaime and Brienne get together in that episode, I like that Florence and the Machine is over the end credits. But those things don't continue in the rest of the season, or in the rest of the episode. They can't save the episode from being bad. Stranger Things, when I think about season 5, there's a lot more things I like, and they aren't even like individual moments like those were. So when I came to watching the finale, I didn't know why people disliked it so much. Now, cards on the table. I don't think it was the best finale in the world. I think it had a lot of problems. But I don't think it was as bad as Game of Thrones, and I certainly don't think it's as bad as, you know, the conspiracies seem to imply. When it came to Stranger Things 5, I had a few things as a fan that I sort of wanted. There were some fan-servicey moments that I was looking for. Like, I wanted Karen Wheeler to find out about the Upside Down. It felt like she'd been hanging around forever, not knowing anything. I wanted the return of Steve's baseball bat. I wanted a better arc for Jonathan. I wanted Steve and Nancy to not get together. Season 4 had been kind of teeing that up, and I disliked it. Because I felt that season 2 had given us a really good reason for them not to be together, so I really just didn't want to tread that ground again. But also at the same time, I really didn't want a new love interest for Steve to be introduced. Because I think the biggest problem with season 4, which is still one of the most critically beloved seasons of the show, is that it's way too bloated. There's 4 storylines, and the one that people like the most is the Hawkins one, and the rest don't get as much attention. For all of the other storylines, there were things that were really important, and there were things that were like absolutely valuable, but they're so long. The Russia storyline had some good stuff in it. I liked specifically the revelation of how Hopper's daughter became sick and why he thinks that that's his fault. It was historically relevant, character relevant, a good piece of information, but it was one speech in quite a long storyline where not a lot of things happened, and when they did happen, they were quite repetitive, like, oh, we're back in the prison where he's having another conversation with Enzo, a character which played very well, I should say. I found that actor very charismatic, but who we don't know anything about. At the same time, we also had Yuri, who was entertaining sometimes, but annoying a lot of the time. And so that storyline really felt like it dragged. Similarly, Elle's storyline in the lab also just sort of dragged out. It took us a long time to get where we were going, and the foreshadowing was important, but I kept feeling like this storyline where she was being bullied was teeing us up for a red herring, so you're meant to think that maybe Elle killed all of them, but we know that's not the case, so it felt like we spent too much time on it, when there could have been just fewer scenes. Similarly, the road trip storyline with Mike and Will and Jonathan and Argyle felt like a huge waste of time. Like, there were some fun bits where they went to see Susie, but otherwise it was long, and it felt like it took time away from the Hawkins storyline, which is what we wanted to see. So when it came to season 5, what I really wanted was for there to be less bloat and to be focused on the main characters. Which, when casting news came out, it felt like that's what was going to happen. There were some new characters, but they were mostly kids, and so I thought they wouldn't have much screen time. Vicky was in the main cast, and I really liked that because I liked, if we were having a new romance, for it to be Robin's that had already been set up, rather than forcing Steve or Nancy into something new. Similarly, once the first volume of Season 5 was released, it was obvious that we were staying within Hawkins as a story, and we weren't having characters like Argyle or Yuri or Enzo, or even like Dr. Owens, like characters that weren't part of the main cast, weren't part of the story. Of course, this is with one big exception, which is that Holly Wheeler, now played by a new actress, was a part of the new main cast. Holly's been she was on the periphery of the main cast the whole time, in kind of the same way that Karen was, especially because they were usually just paired together. Holly was like the excuse of whatever Karen is doing. It's like, why isn't Karen paying attention to her kids? Well, she's paying attention to the youngest one, which is probably the most important. But as soon as Holly became part of the story and Mike gave her a D&D figurine, I figured this is going to be a story about passing on to the next generation. Like, that's kind of key to coming-of-age stories. It's a common trope. This is a bad example, but the one I thought of was High School Musical 3, in which they have a series of younger characters who are sort of taking up the baton, if you will. The same thing happens in Pitch Perfect 2, where they meet Haley Steinfeld, but it's all unimportant. Stories about coming of age often have this arc of passing on the markers of childhood to the next series of children. Toy Story, that's a better example. In Toy Story 3, where the toys are passed on to a new child. The toys have to grow up with Andy. That's the story. I haven't seen any more Toy Stories past that point. I don't know what they are like. But Stranger Things is, at its heart, a coming-of-age story. And when I saw Holly there, it was kind of like, okay, we're going back to basics. And that's kind of how it felt for the first 3 episodes of the show. We were back to basics. People were, Mike was back in his original look. Eddie wasn't there, so he wasn't trying to ape Eddie with his appearance. He was back looking like Mike Wheeler. And he was back behaving like Mike Wheeler from the first series as well, which was nice because it felt like they'd really lost sight of that character in season 4. I liked the first 4 episodes. And even though I read loads of criticism of the next 3, and then the finale, I like them too. Um, I wouldn't say they're my favourite. I wouldn't put them on the level as like some of the middle episodes of season 4. But I would say I like them. And I was disappointed by parts of season 4, especially the fact that the characters didn't get together until the very, very end. The part that I like about Stranger Things is when they get together. Now, one thing I like that in season 5 they start together and then they get split up, but then they come back together. Like that's the part I like. So when it came to volume 2, I spent a lot of time wondering like what it was that people like annoyed people about it, and that made them not enjoy the show anymore. And admittedly, some of my perspective on this was skewed by where I was getting from my information, because I am, alas, still on Tumblr. And I'd gone on Tumblr that morning and seen loads of people were disappointed. But it seemed to be because they were disappointed that their ship didn't sail. For people not in the know, shipping is big in fandom culture, often, like mostly on Tumblr, where you want two characters to get together. And you write fic about it and make posts and stuff. For some reason, people have begun to think of shipping as a competition where if your ship gets together in canon, you win. Like, I don't know what prizes there is to this. I think the better way of enjoying shipping is to just make art by yourself and have no expectations, you know? Yeah, the most popular ship there is Byler, which is Will Byers and Mike Wheeler. It's not a ship I was ever convinced was going to happen. Mostly because it's so evident that, in my mind, that Mike was the sort of writer substitute almost. Not like fully, but like almost, and therefore his relationship with Eleven was probably, he represented something to the writing team, even if I couldn't always tell what that was. Mike represents in season 1 such an early childhood fantasy wherein you have no friends, definitely not any friends of like another sex, and you find someone mysterious and cool in the woods and she likes you immediately. And you get to go on this adventure and she is like completely enamored by you and you are the leader of your little pack. Like, that is its own childhood fantasy, which is like fair, because who doesn't want to be liked and well respected and also date someone perfect for them who has superpowers. But it felt like to me they were never going to abandon Eleven and Mike as a pairing, and they didn't. Anyway, Will came out as gay in volume 2, and it felt like, from my perspective, a lot of people were mad that it wasn't A, a perfect queer story, because it's really not, and B, that it didn't represent the culmination of their ship, which was really strange to me, because I felt like they were willfully misinterpreting the information from volume 1, where I really liked that in the sequence where you have all of the old video footage and Will is gaining his powers, that he had images of himself and Mike and himself and his mum and himself and Jonathan, but the final image that you see is him by himself as a wizard in the woods, and Robin's voiceover says something to the effect of like, the answers were within me all along. And it's like, I think that in terms of a queer coming of age, self-acceptance is the goal before the realization of romantic love. Queer romantic love, while great, is not a replacement for self-acceptance, and that was kind of what they were getting at least sort of. Obviously it was sort of hastily done, I'd say, wherein Robin talks about how when she was younger she had this big crush on Tammy, and the implication was to me that Robin sort of had this dislike of herself for being queer, and focused on Tammy with the idea that if Tammy liked her back, everything would be okay, and that being loved would make up for the lack of love she had for herself. And then she remembered how much she used to love herself when she was a child, when she was younger and more carefree. And she found the answer. The answer was that self-acceptance, which led her to be able to tell Steve and then be more at ease with herself and date Vicky. That's the story. And that was the story that we were going through with Will, wherein he sort of has this distaste for himself because he's queer, which Vecna plans to use against him, so he feels he has to come out to the gang. Obviously, everyone at once had to hear that story. And I'd heard really bad things about this scene before I went in to watch it. And when I went in to watch it, I was kind of like, well, this is fine. It's not great, but it's like, it's fine. I don't know why we were so pressed about it. Like, obviously, Mike is not going to react in a big way. They're probably saving his reaction for the next episode. And the key part of the reaction is probably, like, Jonathan, who is closest to Will, who had been getting the short shrift all season. But, like, it was a fine speech. I just thought it was too long, and that was kind of where I came to with my criticism for the season as a whole. I don't think they lost their touch with the writing necessarily. I think they lost perspective. And I think that's true for, like, other writers that have been in this position. And I'm going to say D.B. Weiss and David Benioff are probably on that list, wherein once you get really big and you were, like, well trusted, you might be edited less. And I haven't seen the behind the scenes like doc that just came out. I sort of don't want to watch it because people are saying kind of gross things again. Like when the season volume 2 first came out, I saw loads of like speculation online, and I'm still seeing it even from people that I previously liked and watched like their videos, where they're now saying that and speculating that one of the reasons that they thought Volume 2 was bad was because one of the Duffer brothers, I forget which because I mixed them up, got divorced. His wife, ex-wife, was the filmmaker behind the Fear Street films. I haven't seen the Fear Street films. I hear they're very good. If you like Stranger Things, you will probably like them. They have a similar setting. It's the 80s. And there's horror and teens. And Sadie Sink. But there's this assertion that Lee Duffer, the filmmaker in question, would have helped her husband in writing Stranger Things, and she was the one that made it good, and now that they're divorced, that's why it's bad. And I saw someone's post, I think it was on Twitter or Threads, I get them mixed up because I hate them both, that said, Ross Duffer, this is why your wife left you, with nothing else. And I just thought that was so rude. Even to her. Because the meaning behind the post is like, Lee Duffer, you were a good writer, but it's mean to her. She's not even being truly credited with her own work in that post. It's so strange to me because, okay, so there has been like historically a theme of women who edit their husband's work, don't get any credit, and then when they get divorced, the husband's work becomes bad. But it's not like the Duffer Brothers were ever alone. There were always two of them. There was always a writer's room. And for some reason, apparently, they also show all of their work to their parents. But none of that gets mentioned. It's just this very salacious speculatory thing where people want to, like, glom onto this divorce like it's a Reddit post. When we don't know anything about it. And she herself hasn't come forward to say, I was involved. You have to trust the voices of women. And she hasn't said anything. This isn't trusting that Lee Duffer had a big part in this story and that she's being, like, her work is being papered over. Because if her work was involved, she probably would have said something by now. And I know that there's going to be someone that comes out of the woods and says, what if there's an NDA? You can't speculate about NDAs existing. You don't have any evidence. Stop speculating. It's weird. It's very rude. Anyway, where was I? I think the reason that... So, the show started, I think, particularly from the episode Escape from Camazotz onward, started being more cliche and more, like, scenes would just drag a little bit. Like the scene with Holly and Max where they're saying goodbye to each other, it just dragged. Like, the pacing just fell off. And I was watching it and I was like, maybe if I'd seen this, like, maybe in the script this was just a bit too long and they could have cut it down. And I thought about it and I thought, we've not... Stranger Things has always had some cliche dialogue. This is not... The show has never been free of cliche. That's why in the beginning we all said, oh, this is quite derivative. Because it is, and it always was. And like, Joyce's final line before she kills Vecna, that's like, you fuck with the wrong family. I thought that was so cliche and unnecessary. She should have been silent in that scene. But at the same time, I don't think the show has been without that before. I just think it's been maybe edited out. To me, it just felt like coming to the end, the writers and the creatives behind it were more trusted, and then they didn't put them under as much pressure as they might have been before. And similarly, it's quite hard to stick a landing. When I was trying to make this video, I was thinking about the Game of Thrones finale and how people thought that was so bad. But at the same time, I was trying to think of a finale that went really, really well. And I couldn't actually think of one. Most finales are sort of not well loved. Of big shows, that is. The ones that I thought of that went well were things like Schitt's Creek and The Good Place, which were, for The Good Place especially, it was planned well ahead of time. But they were much smaller shows. You know, fewer seasons, less time, smaller budget, and they were comedies. And the only finale that I could think of that people really, really liked universally was Succession. I haven't seen that, so I can't speak on it. There were things about this series that I would change. Obviously, I can only, like, make that call because I've seen it and I have hindsight. If I were in the writer's room, I probably wouldn't be able to speak on any of this because I'd be too deep in the weeds. Like, once you're in the writer's room, you lose perspective, which I think is true of, like, a lot of work. When you're in that meeting room, do you know what's happening outside? But it was stuff like... One of the, like, the series was lacking in horror elements when all of the other series had big horror elements. And the big supernatural setting that was new was Camazotz, the mind palace where Henry keeps all the children. And I thought it just looked too nice. Looked like a good time. And I know that was because he was trying to, like, trick them into a false sense of security. But he also kept telling them, don't go into the woods, that's where the monsters are. And I thought, well, why doesn't it look like that then? This is his mind. It's made up of his memories. Why couldn't the woods look like the woods in the Upside Down? And then I thought, well, probably to differentiate them from the woods in the Upside Down, so when you cut between the two, it's clear where the scene is happening. So I was like, why don't they just look like a different scary wood? Like, I thought that maybe the house could have been nice and friendly, with the little playground also being nice and friendly, and then the rest could have been really scary. And that would have convinced the children not to leave the house, and it would have made Holly really brave for doing so. Similarly, I thought that the abyss, way too light. I know that people have said that the sky looks, you know, cheap and weird, and I kind of agree with that. But I thought that it was a design choice that was wrong rather than an execution choice. Like, the Upside Down is kind of blue and red lighting, which helps differentiate it from the real world, even when the real world is in nighttime. But the abyss needed to have a different kind of look and lighting to differentiate from the Upside Down, and so it's yellow, which, great, that makes sense to me. But at the same time, it's like so bright. I thought it was cool that it kind of looked like Nevada, like where the cave thing happened in his memory. So he was like always trapped in that bad memory in a kind of a way. But it was too light, too sunny. I just thought it could have been set during nighttime. And I know where people are coming from with there weren't enough demo dogs and demogorgons in the abyss. I'm kind of there with that. Like, there could have been one or two, maybe a vine. But like, I'd always had this theory that demogorgons were hard to reproduce because in season 1, Will coughs up the like slug from inside his mouth, and then in season 2 that grows to become a demogorgon. And I always thought that maybe that was because in the beginning, the demogorgons and the demodogs behaved in kind of like an animalistic way, like they didn't behave like humans. Like you couldn't tell that they were being directed by this sort of overlord, which, like, we don't know how much they were directed anyway. I always thought that like the demogorgons kidnapped people like Barb and the other people from Hawkins they kidnapped because they needed to reproduce, and that was how they like laid their eggs. So I figured it would have been cool if like they indicated in some way that there were only so many demogorgons, and that by killing 3 of them in the episode The Sorcerer, they've made like a dent. And like maybe like the numbers are depleted because the Russians kidnapped so many of them. But there still would have been a lot of bats. Like, I saw someone else post, I can't credit this person because I forgot who it was, I'm so sorry to whoever posted this, and say that they could have had shown the demogorgons melting and becoming the Mind Flayer lair, like the spider thing. And that would have been a cool idea too. Like they could have, if they didn't want to have demogorgons in the final fight because it would have been too hard for the characters to succeed, there could have been other ways to get rid of them. You know, there were some things, honestly not that big, that I thought were missing from the show. It was stuff like Max's mum isn't in it, and I see why she isn't in the hospital sequences, because that would have been really distracting. Max would have been focused on her mother instead of Lucas or the monsters, and they would have had to explain to her mother like what's going on, and they like that would have like taken the wind out of the plot quite a lot. But I thought when I was watching it, I'm like, why isn't she at graduation? Like they have a blink and you miss it shot of Lucas's parents. They could have had the same with Max's mum, and it would have been like completely possible. And I don't know why she wasn't there. I've seen the actress say she doesn't know why she wasn't there either. And truth be told, I just think they were cutting down on things they wanted in the season, and they cut her and never thought to add her back. And sort of, I understand that because the big problem with season 4 was bloat, and people said so. So obviously they cut down on a lot of things, and they cut down on even more things because they wanted to include like Mr. Clark back and all of these children. So they probably felt like they had to cut a lot of things. I just wish they hadn't been so trigger happy with that, like bring Max's mum back, just so it's not as weird that she's not there. Admittedly though, I think some fans have needed things spelled out for them too much. I know people have been making posts making fun of the Duffers for saying it happened off screen. And yeah, but like some things you could have guessed. Like the idea that, so Dustin and Susie seemingly in my mind broke up between season 4 and 5. And that felt so obvious to me as soon as I saw Dustin. He turns up and he's like framed in the same way that Max is framed in season 4, where she broke up with Lucas. And he's depressed. He's pushing all of his friends away. And it's like, in my mind, I'm going, I don't think it's reasonable that he would still be with his Mormon camp girlfriend who lives in Utah. I can see that they've broken up, clearly. In the real world, this is not a relationship that would last. And I think the only reason people were mad about it was because Susie was a fan favorite character. But I don't think she needed to be in that season or even mentioned. They could have had Steve give a throwaway line to Dustin indicating that he broke up with Susie. But I don't think it was necessary. I think we were meant to make that leap. Similarly, in the epilogue, Vicky is not mentioned, which made me believe that Robin and Vicky had broken up, partly because Robin clearly lived in a different state for college. And people were like, well, they needed to know that happened. And I'd thought that in the epilogue, nearly everything they said was positive. It was the true happy ending kind of vibe. So they didn't indicate if something negative had happened. They just sort of implied it, which made sense to me. And there were some things that I felt could have been more decently explained. In the end of season 2, we have these shots of the military looking up the lab and then driving away, and I thought we could have had at least one of those with Dr. K. It felt obvious to me that they would leave Hawkins, probably because they lost a lot of money and killed a lot of people. They would have tanked the operation because also there was nothing left for them to investigate. But they should have shown us that happening because it was such a big part of the plot. They should have shown us, like, just them driving away would have been fine. But man, oh man, the fan reaction has been deranged. I say this as someone that lived through Sherlock. This is worse. So, Sherlock, the last season, no good. We were all there for that. But for some reason, fans thought that because the last season was no good, it was a huge ploy on the writer's part that they had written a no-good season on purpose in order to trick you and bring you a good one as a surprise. And so they decided that the next upcoming show on BBC, which was called Apple Tree Yard, was actually a secret new episode of Sherlock. And they used incidental evidence for this. Like, in one scene, I think it's Sherlock says, they always stop after 3. And this was meant to be like people stop counting after 3, and so they forget there might be a 4th thing. But that was meant diegetically, like it's about the events of the show. It wasn't about the number of episodes. People interpreted it as there must be a 4th episode. Similarly, one of the actresses in Apple Tree Yard was called Emily Watson, and people said, oh, Emily Watson, John Watson, it goes together. Which was strange because Emily Watson is an actress that has acted in the UK for like a long time and is easily verifiable as a real person. So something really similar happened with Stranger Things, wherein people said that there must be another episode because they didn't like the finale. But the thing that bugged me about it was not that they were like wanting more, because, you know, when a show ends that you like, even if it ended in a way that you liked, you might be left wanting more. Sorry, my grandfather clock is going, which is very, like, on brand for this video. It's reasonable, as a fan, to want more of the show that you really, really like. But we didn't have any evidence of this coming. And the evidence that I was presented by people that were really into this conspiracy theory was really incidental and annoying to me. Basically, to me, it felt like a misinterpretation of symbolism. And that really got me. It wasn't even like them disliking the show that I thought was still like what I expected. It was that they were misinterpreting information from the show in like such a willfully strange way. Like, it was the poor media reading that got me rather than anything else. So, the theory, people call it conformity gate, which I also hate because I hate adding gate to the end of things to make them sound like a big deal. The theory says that the events of the epilogue are in Vecna's mind, and Vecna is still alive, and he's got all of the people, the main characters in his mind, specifically Mike. It's meant to be like in Mike's mind. And at the end of, when episode 9 comes out, because of course it's coming, we will learn that this was not real and we will be given a better ending. Never mind that a lot of the characters' endings were really good and what we wanted. And it was just so strange to me. Because I don't think there is any version of the story where you point to something that's happened and say, this is all a dream, and have the next part be better. Because saying that it was a dream would be so cheap. And I know that happens in shows, and it has happened in Stranger Things, where like you think Max. You think Max is talking to her mother. It turns out she's in a Vecna dream, but that was so short. And the point is horror. The point is not to lie to the audience. There's a difference between having a reveal and lying to your audience. And this would be lying. Anyway, I thought that the evidence for it, for conformity gate, deeply strange. Like there were some things that were just off to me. People said that everyone sitting at the graduation was sitting with their hands on their lap, folded like this, and that was the way that Vecna stood. And I saw that and I was like, what are you talking about? Vecna doesn't stand with his hands together like that very much. He stands like that when we first meet him as Henry in Eleven's flashback. He's there with his hands in his front. But there were loads of like pictures of Billy also standing like that, but Billy only stood like that in like one scene, as did Will. It's just a normal way to stand, but it's not like it's a pose that the characters do lots, especially because Vecna never stands like that when he's as Vecna, because it would be impossible with the prosthetic hand to stand with your hands together. So I was like, this is so incidental and it's so clearly just an internet post and not a plot point. I saw someone saying that the people at the graduation were sitting with their hands together because they'd been directed to, and I'm like, wow, like they're actors. They must have been directed to. Oh, and I saw people saying that the orange gowns were a sign that everything was wrong because they were meant to be green. That was so... I couldn't make head nor tail of that one either. Because, so the orange gowns, they were that colour because the colours of Hawk and Ty were orange and green. They've been that way since the first series. They show, that's how they differentiate the halls of the high school versus the middle school. The middle school is blue, the high school is green and orange. And the Duffers had originally planned to have green robes, and the costume designer, I watched her videos on InStyle. They're very cool, I really appreciate those. And she had convinced them to use orange because the background would be grass and therefore the green would really blend in and the orange would pop. And I agree, the orange does pop. It's very bright and it's not within the usual colour story of the show, which made me feel like it was in a new era because also the characters' costumes are sort of different colours to what they would normally be. And I was like, we're in a new colour story. We're in a new era. But people thought it was weird because I think they thought the orange was ugly, and it was a little bit, but like it was graduation gowns, so I figured they would be. I like seeing ugly things on the show on screen sometimes. I think they're good for the soul. But yes, I think the conformity gate theory just is a failure to interpret symbolism. For instance, I saw a lot of fans, admittedly mostly on Tumblr, saying they were disappointed not to see the Thessal Hydra, and you might say, the Thessal Hydra? And that is because in the first series, in the final epilogue, in the epilogue of the first series, there's a scene where they're playing D&D again, and it's a mirror to the first episode where Mike brings out their Demogorgon, and instead he brings out the Thessal Hydra. And there's a little bit of dialogue where they imply there's more story to tell. They're like, what about the weird flowers in the cave? What about the princess? And people, when that series ended, and tried to interpret it as like a one-for-one comparison, like maybe the princess was Nancy, and maybe the weird flowers in the cave was that egg that they found in the Upside Down. Or the thing that Will coughed up into the sink. And I don't think it was meant to be a one-for-one comparison. I think they were just saying, there's more story to tell, please renew our show. Because in the original D&D scene, in the first episode, the Demogorgon isn't actually meant to represent the monster. The Demogorgon is just a monster, and it's only called the Demogorgon in an organic way, like Ella's trying to explain that there's a monster, and she picks up the monster figurine, and so they call it the Demogorgon because that's what it's called. The Thessal Hydra was never meant to appear. When you are meant to interpret the D&D scenes on a deeper level, but in terms of character, like the choices that the characters make in the D&D scene, like whether or not Will uses Fireball, is a key character moment. And the way that Mike, sorry, my father always mixes up Mike and Will, and now I do too, seemingly. The way that Mike DMs and talks to his friends is key to showing character and where the arc might go, but you're not meant to interpret the contents of that campaign literally. The same thing with Eddie's campaign. So in Eddie's campaign, they're fighting Vecna, which is the way to introduce Vecna as an idea, because they later name the villain Vecna. Dustin rolls an 11, which doesn't hit him, and I saw people saying that Joyce did 11 swings on Vecna, and 11 doesn't hit him, and I'm like, that's not. In Stranger Things, they don't typically have symbolism like that reflect the events of the show in such a literal way. In a show like Game of Thrones, they sometimes did, because that was a trait of George R. R. Martin's writing style, wherein he would have a prophecy that would reflect things that would happen soon, like the Ghost of High Heart prophesizes the Red Wedding. In the show, they did it far more literally because they were like that. Like, they would have Daenerys, rather than seeing, like, in the House of the Undying, instead of seeing like a woman being torn apart by 4 little beasties to represent the War of the Five Kings, they have her walk into the Iron Throne room that's either covered by snow or ash, and it's a prophecy of what might come in the future. But Stranger Things doesn't have prophecy. That's not what it's like. Stranger Things used its D&D to show off character dynamics, not symbolism. The D&D scene is meant to, in season 4, is meant to help you understand who Eddie is, and set up, like, you're not necessarily foreshadowing Vecna. It's just that you have to understand who Vecna is in D&D to understand why Dustin names the villain Vecna. And in every other season they do a similar thing, but usually the other way around. Wherein, when Dustin names the Mind Flayer, he immediately gets out his, like, creature manual and it reads from it. And they would have done the same thing in season 4 if we hadn't already witnessed who Vecna is. It's not symbolism in the same way as other shows might include, but even Game of Thrones didn't include symbolism like that. It's not meant to be foreshadowing in a literal way. Vigner's dead, even though 11 strikes were used to take him. Also, it's just a willful misinterpretation of how D&D works, and that makes me mad. A lot of D&D diehards prior to Stranger Things were really annoyed by it because it didn't interpret D&D in a literal way. So the Demogorgon in Stranger Things doesn't look anything like the Demogorgon in D&D, and the Mind Flayer as well. Like, if you play Baldur's Gate and you encounter the Mind Flayer in the opening, you'll be like, wow, this isn't like Stranger Things. This isn't the big smoke monster in the sky. Because it's not. The Stranger Things never intended to have a one-for-one comparison with D&D. Vecna's not the same in D&D as he is in Stranger Things. D&D is rather the tool by which the kids use to understand the, like, sci-fi things that are happening to them. So it would make no sense for anything called the Thessal Hydra to appear, because the Demogorgon didn't look like the original Demogorgon. So there would be no Thessal Hydra, and even if it appeared, it would be so cheap. I don't know, Conformity Gate, the theory, just really irked me in many ways. I saw recently Kit Harington saying he was outraged by people signing a petition for a new Game of Thrones finale to be made, and he said he just hated that. And this is coming from Kit Harington, someone who's actively shown no enthusiasm for the Game of Thrones finale. But you can see how insulting it would be, even if you didn't like the script, to say that people wanted to do your work again and that they felt entitled to do it again. Which, all of the creators involved, none of them want to do it again. Like, even though they didn't like the final season, they don't want to go back. And similarly with Stranger Things, there's things I don't like about the final season, like Joyce is barely there. She also seems to have no awareness of Jonathan's existence. Jonathan's storyline is nothing. They really biffed that character again. And 11 has this complete failed coming of age arc, and that would take too long for me to talk about, and this video is also already going on so long, far longer than I intended. Maybe I will make a different video about the failed coming of age arc for 11. Anyway, it wasn't that bad, and I think that the real problem is fans failing to interpret media on its own terms, which is going to make me sound crazy and annoying and like such a self-important loser, but I'm so mad about it. Mike doesn't wear glasses in the final scene because he needs to look like his dad, the symbol of conformity. He wears glasses to show that time has passed, and maybe to make him look like Stephen King. Also, if Mike looks like his dad, so what? There's a genetic relationship. God, I hate it. Mike was never like a huge not conformist. Out of all of his friends, he was the closest to conformity. Only in season 4 does he dress in a different way because he's trying to impress Eddie, and even then it's like he has slightly longer hair and black jeans. This was not hard to get away from. I just think that people are criticizing the show badly, and I will speak about that forever. And be annoying.